Welcome, Alain, to our podcast.
Thanks so much, Scott. I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
In your TED Talk, you say leadership is about getting others to willingly work toward a shared purpose. And on your website, you mentioned that 71% of organizations say their leaders are not future ready. What are some common assumptions about leadership that can get people into trouble?
Oh my gosh, what a huge question to start with, Scott. That's a great question. So there are a lot of things. The fact is, the state of leadership is poor. Just to follow up with that stat, only 23% of people believe that their leaders lead well. And I think one of the assumptions, and it's something we don't even think about, it just sort of is what happens. And I'll share this through a story. So I've got two kids. My son Alex is 16, and my daughter Miranda is 13. So about 10 years ago, they must have been about 6 and 3. The two of them were in our living room. And as kids do, they were goofing off and getting really loud. I have to confess, Scott, I got a little triggered. And I came over and I went to them. And I didn't even realize I was going to say it. I just came over. I was triggered. I went, "Would you stop behaving like children?" And I tell you this story for two reasons. Number one, it's a stupid, ridiculous thing to say, right? They were children. But number two, as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was in shock because "would you stop behaving like children" was the exact same phrase and the same tonality as my mom used with my brother and I when we were kids. So without even realizing it, I had repeated the patterns of the previous generation. So I share that story because if I think about what are the assumptions that leaders have, why do we lead the way we do? Well, we pretty much copy the behavior of the previous generation, and they copied their leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And for most of us, the modeling that we have received around leadership is "I'm the daddy," or "I'm the boss," or "I'm the mommy, I'm the boss. Do because I said so." That's why we resort to power, because we are in charge. We think we can lord over other people. And so one of the biggest habits is we get intoxicated with the role of leadership. And what we don't recognize is in the moment, at best, you will get compliance from people when you say, "You need to do this now." Because, and I think it's a very good strategy if a building is on fire, right? If the building's on fire, I don't think we should have a big, long discussion and say, "Well, what exit do you think we should leave the building from, Scott? Because the flames are growing."
Right.
No, we need to go like, "Let's go now, go." Like there's a time and a place for that kind of leadership, but it's very rare. So one of the biggest challenges and assumptions that we have is because I'm the boss or I'm the leader, I think I can tell people what to do. And the challenge when we do that, and there's been great research on this, is the more power we feel, the less empathy we have for other people, which is a scary thing to think about. So we have to actively counteract that impulse as leaders so that we can create stronger connections. Because all the research would also say that people will be more engaged, be more likely to stay at work, and do higher levels of productivity if they feel that they are being cared for and they are trusted. And so it's a flip from what we'll call the old school style of leadership. So I'd say, in a nutshell, all of that is one of the giant assumptions that gets in the way of people leading well.
How should a leader prepare themselves and do the self-development required to be a good leader? I'm thinking about reflection, and there was an article in Harvard Business Review of the importance of journal writing for just reflection for leaders.
Yeah.
What do you usually coach leaders to do in terms of reflection for themselves?
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point. The fact is, you really can't start building relationships, conscious, intentional relationships with other people until you start having one with yourself. You're not exempt from this. So starting to build those relationships, I love the idea of journaling. The fact is, you need to have some kind of practice that involves you stopping, right? Which is hard, right? Stopping and reflecting, taking time and seeing it as an investment, which I see so many leaders I coach like, "But I'm too busy to stop." That's kind of like saying, "I don't have time to get my car tuned up because I'm too busy driving." Well, you know what'll happen if you don't get your car's oil changed and tune up after a while. It's the same thing with leadership. So I would say reflection is a big piece. Whether, reflection in terms of whether that's journaling, whether it's planning. Some people, the planning out their day, whether it's spending some time going through some kind of a values clarity exercise to understand what's truly important to you. Another key piece in terms of reflection is get feedback from other people around you. There's all this great research that says humans are notoriously bad at self-awareness and insight. For example, about 90% of people say that they are above average drivers. Now, last time I checked, only 50% can be above average, because the average would be the mean, 50%. So we are really bad at self-awareness and self-assessment. So getting feedback from people around you can really start to give you a reality check as to what's going on in terms of how you do versus other people. So self-awareness and feedback are two key pieces to helping develop people.
Great. Let's switch gears a bit to communication skills. Now, you are an actor, and you have that great advantage of being able to bring forward all those qualities that you've learned through the arts. Could you talk about your process of moving from being an actor to being a leadership consultant and coach?
Sure, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting dots to connect here, Scott. So, I first started getting interested in the theater and in acting from a very idealistic liberal arts perspective. I went to an undergrad liberal arts college, and there I got that wonderful ideal that when the arts are at their best, they are, I think Shakespeare said, as they are a mirror to nature. And they hold up, and we learn things about them ourselves, and we walk away changed. And that was actually what got me interested in the arts, really wanting to be in theater. And then I went on to graduate school as an actor. And what I found was my ideal versus the actual reality of the business of acting, the profession, they weren't the same. And so what I found myself was being drawn towards people who were using the arts to help people to develop themselves. I got involved with a company called the Irondale Ensemble Project. It's still going. It's been around for over 30 years in New York, and they do a lot. They do performance. They do 2 off-Broadway performances a year, 2 shows, but they also do a lot of teaching using arts in education, helping people to learn about themselves, because part of the tools of an actor are how do you express yourself? How do you communicate powerfully, dynamically, clearly to others? Usually it's through drama, but how do you do that in your life? So we would go in and we would do residencies in schools. We would work in drug rehab centers and prisons. We got all these grants from the New York State Department of Education around anti-violence. And so I learned a ton around that. And those became kind of arts and education life skills I was teaching. Then someone along the way, so doing all this educational training, they said, have you ever thought about working in businesses? I thought, no, I don't know anything about businesses. They said, well, you should check out this meeting of the American Society of Training and Development, because it sounds like you're doing a lot of training work. So I went to the meeting, and I'll make a longer story shorter, is I ended up getting a job working for an external training company called Eagles Flight, which is based in Canada. And they do a lot of complicated experiential simulations, business simulations that are all around human behavior for businesses. And they work with all sorts of Fortune 500 companies. So that's where I started to learn about the business world and adapting all of what I'd done in the arts in a business context. Because what I have found, Scott, is that it doesn't really matter what industry that you work in, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, schools, governments. We are all in the people business because you're all working with people. That's the common denominator. So my work really focuses on what are the nuances of human behavior, and how do you learn how to use these nuances through your own skills and behavior so that you can influence other people to create something better somehow, some kind of purpose greater than yourselves. And that's what I think leadership at its core is really about. It's getting others to willingly work with you towards some kind of a shared purpose.
It seems to be with the arts and music that there's a immediacy that you can tap into that would be easily applied to leadership. Like with one chord, you could, with the guitar, you could really draw that person in, or the first scene of the acting.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that, but
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, the fact is, we as artists, performing artists, what we traffic in is engagement and attention. I mean, when you pay a ticket to go to a movie or a play or a musical or a rock concert or the symphony What are you paying for? You want to go in. The last thing you want to do is be bored, right? You want to be engaged and on the edge of your seat the whole time. At the end, you want to be moved and inspired and motivated and thinking about things differently. And you may have shed a tear or two along the way. That is what performing artists do. Now, wouldn't it be great if leaders could just take even like 10% of that craft and apply it, especially I think in the business world where the bar is so low and so many of the meetings are so boring and just blah. Like, what if we could take some of that and get people to be a little bit more on the edge of their seats? Right? Because the biggest challenge that we're facing as leaders everywhere is we are competing for people's attention. If we are boring, they're going to pull that phone out of their pocket and they're going to start scrolling and doing something else. So, how do we captivate and enthrall and engage people and get them involved beyond this is your job and I'm paying you, right? That's a very old school way of thinking about engagement and motivation.
I find that a lot of creatives seem to slip by the wayside in business sense. Do you have any advice for creatives to be able to use that art or the music as a strength, and as opposed to, it seems sometimes it's seen as a weakness, or you're too, California, too woo
Yeah,
woo?
great point. Great point. So I'll tell you a story about this that really brings this to life. So when I was in grad school as an actor over the summer, I was trying to make money. So I was waiting tables. I also signed up with a temp agency. And the temp agency called me up one day. I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They said, "Hey, you're an actor. Can you run a video camera?" Now, this is 1993 or four. So it's like big old beta VHS cameras, right? The big giant ones. Sure, I can run a video camera. Great. Well, we'll pay you $9 an hour to go run a video camera for 2 days. You're going to go to First Wisconsin Bank. You're going to meet this guy, Mr. Marshall, in the lobby. Got it? Good. So Monday morning, I'm in the lobby and I meet this guy, Mr. Marshall. And he looks really, I'm like, Tom Marshall? This is a guy that I went to college with. He was a few years older than me. He was a transfer student. But he said, yeah, Alain, how are you? So he said, great, you're in. So anyway, turns out Mr. Marshall, Tom Marshall, is working for a company called the Executive Technique, and they are teaching corporate executives presentation skills. And I'm there to videotape them so he can give them feedback along the way. That's what I got hired for. So I'm watching Tom do his thing all morning, and we take our first break. And on the break, I said, Tom, you're teaching people acting skills. He said, shh, shh, shh. Yes, it's true, but we don't call them that because otherwise they wouldn't see us as credible. So my first big hint to artists is, yeah, what you have to offer the world is massively of value. And if you're thinking about wanting to use it to help people who are in the business world or some way, you need to translate your value into a language that people already understand. Because if you say, look, people will be more expressive, and look, chief financial officers aren't trained to think about expression. They're like, how is this going to help my bottom line? So starting to translate things into things like employee engagement, retention. How is this going to increase profitability, increase quality, decrease rework? So you have to learn a bit about your audience so you can speak in their language. So that's the first area I would say. The other thing is a lot of us, I think, in the arts, we got into this because we are really enthralled with the work itself. Now, there's the work, but then there's the marketing and the selling of the work. And those are two different skill sets. So you have to go beyond your comfort zone of thinking that if I just do good work, it's going to speak for itself, and actually really work to do a few things. First, you've got to be great at what you do. That's the first pillar. There's three pillars here. The first is your content. You got to be great at what you do, and you've got to already know how to translate it to the people you're talking to, like we talked about already. So that's number one, content. Number two, you've got to build your network. No one is going to seek you out. You have to go and find them. And then number three is then you've got to get people what Robert Cialdini in his famous book Influence calls social proof. Who else says you're good? And how do people find out about that? Right? We all want, why do people have pictures of them next to famous people or the president or whoever it is in their offices along the way? Is because they want you, oh, you're with those people. Suddenly you seem like you have more status. For me, when I launched my book, I went out and I sought out endorsements from thought leaders I really admired. And it makes a difference because suddenly when I have someone like a Dan Pink or a Marshall Goldsmith who's endorsed my book, I can use that name as social proof for some influence. So those are the areas I'd focus on. So just to recap is just think about how do you build your influence? And then the other piece is translate your stuff to speak in their language.
That was awesome. I think that'll also be very helpful for entrepreneurs or solopreneurs in that they have a craft that they have mastered, but you have to translate that into the business side.
Yeah, very much so. It's always thinking about, the customer. Now I'm going to use an example to bring that to life. This is a story about Jeff Bezos. Everyone knows who that is, the world's richest man. But the story goes is that early in the days of Amazon is whenever they would have meetings around the table about business decisions that Amazon had to do, is Bezos at the meeting when they were meeting live face to face, they would bring an empty chair and they would have an empty chair at the meeting extra, and the empty chair was there to represent the customer. So I would
Mm.
suggest to anyone as you're thinking about what should I do, always have that customer in mind. You might be familiar with the idea of building out a customer avatar, who is your ideal customer. And as you think about the decisions you want to make, how would these decisions influence or impact that customer? Because it isn't about what you want, it's about what they want.
You have an exciting book out called Cracking the Leadership Code: 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. What is the biggest takeaway from your book?
Oh my gosh, the biggest I'd say the biggest takeaway is that leadership at its core is a series of skills that can be learned. And the subtitle of the book are the 3 secrets to building strong leaders. And those 3 secrets are connection, communication, and collaboration. And so what the book does is it unpacks each of those 3 competencies and breaks them down into their component behaviors, shows you what gets in the way of being able to do these, and then what you can do to get better at being a better connector, a better communicator, and a better collaborator. And so I think when people walk away, they go, oh my gosh, he's taken these complex ideas and simplified them and made them digestible and practical and actionable enough that I can go off and start becoming a better leader. Look, we can talk about leadership all day. It's kind of like, let's talk about golf. We can listen to a podcast about golf. It's not going to make you a better golfer. At a certain point, you're going to have to get on the course. You're going to have to start swinging those clubs. I don't play golf, by the way, but the analogy works. But that's true for any kind of performing endeavor. Leadership is a performing art, and you need to start practicing it. So what I've done is broken those behaviors down. And I think that is the biggest takeaway is people walk away feeling confident they can start to accelerate the learning curve of their leadership journey.
That's great. Besides your occupation, what are some of the other hats that you wear?
Well, biggest hat I wear, I want to say, is being a dad. So I have a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. So, and for me, it's trying to be really present to their experience of life. That is one of the biggest hats that I wear. I'm thinking that, family is important to me. So I have a mom who's just turning 85 and she's in assisted living. And we're recording this in a pandemic, but she's kind of sort of trapped in her residence where she is. So reaching out and calling her every day seems like a really useful, important thing to do. So building relationships with people. So that's another one of the hats that I wear. I mean, other than that as well, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So I have this book and this brand and this business. So there's always the work. One of my friends calls it the holy hustle. It's like every
Mhm.
day I need to be moving some aspect of this business forward, because if I don't move it forward, it starts to shrink and atrophy. So there is no one else. There's me. So those are some areas. Besides that, I'm very interested in keeping my health. So physical activity of all kinds. I love to ride a bicycle, go to the gym, just staying active, because I just feel like that helps my mental clarity as well as my emotional sanity at the same
Mm.
time. Yeah.
What is your approach to work-life balance or work-life integration?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer is that we need renewal. I mean, humans are not designed like machines to go on and on and on and on. We need breaks. We need different things. So I have built. Another thing is, I think if you have to think about taking a break all the time, you're not going to do it. What you want to do is make those habitual or automatic. So, for example, I plug in, like before we recorded the podcast today, I went to the gym and I rode 5,000 meters on a rowing machine, because because I knew that I'm recording 3 podcasts today. I know I have to be fresh, and I've got, a busy day. So I built that into the schedule. I have just things around my schedule. I have to, and I'll say I'm not perfect at this. One of my big challenges is to shut things down at night. When I'm in a good phase, I turn off all electronics by 9 p.m. And then I try to get into bed by 11. I go through different phases. Before we were in lockdown and could travel, I was traveling all over. So having a regular schedule has never been a strength of mine. So being sheltering in place is really giving me the opportunity to work on carving out a schedule. If people are interested in learning how to cultivate habits, I'll recommend a book, and I get no, other than I think it's awesome. I don't get any affiliate or anything like this. It's a book by a guy named BJ Fogg. It's called Tiny Habits. He's probably the world's premier expert on habit formation, and he has very much informed how I think about building up habits and behavior change. And a lot of the conventional wisdom, such as it takes 21 days, et cetera, to build a habit, is wrong. So it's a huge resource that I recommend to anyone.
How can people get more information about you and your company?
Sure. Probably the easiest place to go is my book has its own website, which is easier to spell than my name, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. While you're there, you can read all about the book. You can actually download the first chapter of the book, and that takes you right to the AlainHunkins.com website. And you can surf around there. You can learn all about the work that I do with individuals, teams, and organizations to help people become better leaders, whether that's through coaching or training or speaking or consulting or writing. That's all that. And one thing also is I am launching, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, Scott, but starting October the 5th of 2020, I am launching a 30-day online leadership challenge. And there's information about that on the website as well. And if people have any further questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you've listened this far, you are part of the end of the podcast club. You can email me directly. And that's my email address is Alain, ALAIN, at Alain Hunkins, ALAINHUNKINS.com. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly. And I always do answer all those questions personally. It might take me 24 or 48 hours, but I'll get back to you, I promise.
My final question is, what's one powerful action step that our listeners can take to help them live a joyful, productive, and fulfilling life?
Wow. Joyful, fulfilling, and productive. What I find, one step, there's a lot of things we can do. I would say one thing, and there's great science behind this, is work on cultivating a gratitude practice of some kind. The fact is, when we feel grateful, it's really hard to feel lack and scarcity. When we feel grateful, you step away from fear a little bit and you move towards trust. When you feel grateful, you suddenly have a sense of creativity and generosity that you didn't have if you're not feeling grateful. So it doesn't have to be pages and pages of morning journal. It can be literally sit down either in the morning or in the evening, or frankly, anytime, and just, what is one thing I am grateful for right now? That's what I would say, because that's going to frame your mindset in a way for you to start doing all the other things that you're going to do.
Well, Alain, you're a pleasure to speak with. This is great. I think the audience is going to love it. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's really been my pleasure. I really have enjoyed our conversation.
Great.
Thanks.
Welcome to the All the Hats We Wear podcast. This show will teach you the time management skills you need to be joyful, productive, and fulfilled. This is episode 36, and I'm your host, life coach, and productivity expert, Scott Snow. Get ready for today's episode. We have a very special guest. Alain Hunkins helps high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. Over his 20-year career, Alain has worked with over 2,000 groups of leaders in 25 countries. Clients include Walmart, Pfizer, Citigroup, General Electric, State Farm Insurance, IBM, General Motors, and Microsoft. In addition to being a leadership speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach, Alain is the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders, published by Wiley. Alain is the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. which was endorsed by leadership luminaries Jim Kouzes, Barry Posner, and Marshall Goldsmith. A faculty member of Duke Corporate Education, Alain's writing has been featured in Fast Company, Inc., Forbes, Chief Executive, Chief Learning Officer, and Business Insider. You're meant to do great things. If you want to be an innovator and visionary, you have to manage your busy life like one. The All the Hats We Wear planner is the planner for the future. I want to give you a free month of the planner to try out for yourself. Nothing will slip through the cracks anymore. When you use the All the Hats We Wear planner, you'll have everything you need at your fingertips. All of your goals, a vision statement, a list of daily habits, and a checklist to track your progress. Key information for the small and large projects on your plate. Daily sheets to clarify your top outcomes for each day. A week at a glance section to plan for the coming weeks, and much more. The All the Hats We Wear planner will be your roadmap to a more joyful, productive, and fulfilling life. To claim your free month so you can see for yourself how it will streamline your busy life, visit allthehatswewear.com.